in addition to these aspects of entrapment and placing Black people in positions where they're unable to freely travel about sufficiently or easily as a free citizen should be, you also have significant aspects of criminalization of petty crimes or extremely small scale crimes, which allows for law enforcement to be extremely heavy handed and strict in regards to how Black people were treated. Something that very much continues into the modern narrative about criminalization of mundane acts by African American people and Black people. So the Reconstruction Act of 1867 were a series of acts and laws that were passed in order to soften the harshness of the Black codes. Exactly. So when people talk about the eras of post-slavery after the Civil War and how that bled into racist laws, there is a significant blending in the minds of most people in regards to the Black codes and the Jim Crow laws as a nebulous singular stretch of time, when there is actually a particular legal and historical difference in terms of both their function and their implementation. So with the Reconstruction Act of 1867 is when you get into this particular shift where you move away from the previous Black codes and into the Jim Crow laws, where the Jim Crow laws had a specific focus on separating Black and white people after the court case of Plessy versus Ferguson, specifically in regards to the strengthening of the foundations of the term separate but equal, rather than the Black codes previously, which were specifically and much more blatantly targeting the even most basic rights and freedoms of technically freed Black people. So the Jim Crow laws, such as I had recently described, were very much about the segregation of Black and white people, allowing them to not be in close proximity or occupy the same public spaces. This included as simple a thing as being able to associate in certain spaces outside, using things such as the same bathrooms and water fountains. And this is something that a lot of people have a clear image in their mind of when they think of American segregation and the civil rights era, is this form of law and this form of incredibly pervasive and entrenched system of laws that were across every level of being a private citizen and stretching well into aspects of government service such as the military. During this era is when you also get a specific boom in a lot of the particular physical caricatures that continue to be used to demonize Black people. Is where you have a lot of the births of specific stereotypes, which still continue to this day, such as blackface is a very commonly known one. Just because I don't want the moment to be lost, because it was brought up during the last video, I think we might have gone over the Reconstruction slide, because there definitely was one made, but because it was asked about. So during the Reconstruction era, like you had mentioned, it was something that was done immediately post Civil War or after the completion of the war, because that's an important thing to remember, is that the Emancipation Proclamation was done before the war actually ended, and so there were lots of freed Black people that had no forms of governmental assistance or aid, and were just prone to massive issues with overexposure, rampant disease, no shelter, et cetera, et cetera. And when the war actually ended and the Reconstruction process began, there was a government agency created called the Freedmen's Board, which was responsible for a lot of things, but the most important one in the context of this conversation was it was responsible for aiding in the transition for freed, formerly enslaved people and refugees from the Civil War, because obviously there was lots of destruction of property, homes, entire cities. So there were lots of refugees, both white and black, after the Civil Wars. The Freedmen Board was primarily responsible for aiding those people in that transition. It was one that very quickly lost funding because of a lack of support in Congress. And as soon as the Southern representatives and senators, which were so graciously returned to Congress after the Civil War, were able to voice their will and their opinions, it was dead in the water, basically. And the Freedmen Board was stripped of almost all of its funding until it was eventually just completely shut down. And then that's when you got into a lot of the passing of these laws that was described in this video, specifically in those states, since they were able to return their individual states' wills to those and enacted the Black Codes, which would then be followed historically by the Jim Crow laws, et cetera, et cetera.
And then, as Antoine pointed out in the chat, the federal troops were withdrawn from the South, and they left the Black people to the will of all those hostile people all around them. And so then followed a very violent period. If this wasn't already violent, now followed an even more violent period. And let's bring up that, hopefully this next slide, this next clip is about that, Adam.
The Red Summer of 1919 is a very important moment as it would relate to matters of civil service, really. So in this time period, you have a lot of veterans returning from World War I, where the United States fought on the side of the Triple Entente. And in that regard, you had lots of Black people serving in the American military in this time. Now, the military was still heavily segregated, as was mentioned in the previous section. However, in this sense, you had Black soldiers that were putting their lives on the line and fighting in combat against the enemies of the United States of America that are returning to be brutalized and abused by the very same country that they had just devoted their lives to protecting. And so you have lots of examples of Black World War I veterans, forming militias to protect Black communities from racist mobs that would go after Black populations during this time frame. So you have lots of examples of Black communities and Black neighborhoods that were formed and were not only self-sufficient, but prospering based on just levels of internal economic interaction and investment of the Black people living there. And these places were truly brutalized in horrid acts of terrorism by white people that were just aghast at such displays. And these are situations where you just have law enforcement turning a complete blind eye, or even in some cases assisting in the brutalization and the destruction of Black prosperity, or even Black existence in many cases. So to dive a bit into the aspects of American policing, it's a very complex history. Certainly something that you can draw from in regards to all of the farthest roots of American policing, which is the same with all policing in the world, is that policing is a form of law enforcement and armed law enforcement for the sake of protecting power structures. And when you're dealing with a system that has inherently racist or bigoted aspects that are accepted, or in many cases directly key and integral to said power structures, that is often where you can find said roots. So a common connection and link to policing and in the United States of America, and especially in the Deep South, or direct links to slave patrols, which were informal groups of law enforcement that were used to return escaped slaves to their plantations should they ever flee from their locations. Other such examples to protecting the pre-existing power structures, one that was common in the Puritan Northeast, were local night patrols that would be responsible for monitoring and policing the religious dignity of their neighbors should they step out of line of the Puritan roots and traditions, branching into things such as suspicions of blasphemy or papalry, as it would have been said at the time, or even branching to things such as witchcraft, which is something that's very commonly known to be associated with the history of the Northeast in the United States. So you have lots of history of brutalization of Black people in the United States. And this is something that is perpetrated on many levels, both institutionally in regards to codified law. And now in this time period, we're often branching into how a specific level of physical cruelty and brutality is inflicted upon the Black citizenry by the white citizenry. You have examples of entire neighborhoods, let alone individual homes, being burned and looted because they were examples of Black prosperity. You have situations of raw and bloodied beatings against Black individuals by white mobs for simple matters of fraternization or stepping outside of the perceived bounds of what was acceptable at the time. And these are things that continue in certain levels. You have perceptions and stereotypes born from these sorts of things, such as the perceptions of Black men as inherent threats, especially inherent threats to the vulnerable white woman, which had to be protected by the white male citizenry at all costs. And that was a very common inciting incident for a lot of these acts of brutality.
That's the movie King Kong.
Lynching, of course, being the ultimate example and symbol of this, where you would have this particular symbology. You would take a Black individual and you would hang them by the neck until dead. And that's the bare minimum of what the technical definition of lynching is. It was often also associated with horrid and cruel acts of mutilation and embarrassment, even often emasculating the subjects in question in a very literal sense, not in the sociological sense. And these are truly horrid and bloody, evil acts that were committed as quite literal acts of terrorism in order to cause enough fear and panic in order to lower and keep the Black Americans in their place that were deemed for them to subsist in.
And so, I mean, there is so much that just doing this little flash and having this little discussion doesn't even get us close. So the videos that you receive will give you more in depth, but none of it is enough. I mean, we see in the papers every day now where, Manhattan Beach was taken from the Black, this strip of land was taken from the Black owners of it. And that's how it was. And as somebody, maybe it was Jordana, brought up in the chat, there, and as you can see, looking back through the history, white people were told and taught that they should, if they saw a Black person, to watch. It wasn't just the slave patrols. If you were white, you had the right to question a Black person anywhere you saw them. So now white people still see a Black person and are ready to question. And we see that we saw that
Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon Martin, right.
So, Farah, I just wanted to say, when you were in the video clip, you talked about this emasculating that goes on, and I always think about New York City with the thousands and thousands of stop and frisks, which mostly affected Black men and boys. And if you looked at them, they were pushed up about fences. They're in public. Sometimes they had to pull down their trousers right on the street because they were being frisked. And it just reminds me of this ongoing, and even the things that go on today, like what Diane is saying, just questioning the presence of people at a university or in a neighborhood. And so it's just continued in a different form.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like when I had mentioned that in the video, I did mean it like in the most literal and brutal way, which is, like mutilation. Though obviously that continues to be said in, the sociological context, and it obviously is a less physical act in some of those cases, sometimes still physical, but less physical, but it stems from the same sorts of this depraved intentions of inflicting either physical pain or embarrassment or both in a very specific way to that aspect of personhood.
Right, but I'm saying the trauma, like we never talk, we say, oh, you think about if you're a 16-year-old boy, they even interviewed a man in his 30s. He was stopped 7-8 times over the years, and that happened to him. So it's not a physical, I think it's probably very frightening, but it's not a lynching, but it's a humiliation that is a trauma. And if you think about that happening publicly, I mean, to me, it's a huge trauma, and it's affected all of those tens of thousands of men and boys who were boys at the time.
I can speak on that. As far as looking the way I look, or looking the way that Frank looks, or looking the way that Farrell looks, we could probably all tell you a story or two about what I call blue nights. And I call a blue night is a night when you get pulled over by some punk cop who thinks that he's better than you and thinks that you're about wrong, or that he can find something on you, or that he can intimidate you, or that you're going to do something stupid to give him a reason to shoot you. So one of these particular, and I've had a few, and this, mind you, I'm a teacher. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a hood. You know what I'm saying? I'm a upstanding member of our community, by golly. And so when this happens, I'm sitting, the last time it was because they were having a what do they call those blocks? A roadblock. I saw the roadblock long before it happened, didn't feel like dealing with it, and decided to go a different direction. This guy chased me down, pulls me over. I said, okay. I stopped the car, put my hands on the wheel. Many brothers have been getting shot all of my life, so I know better, right? Put them up there. What's the problem? Blah, blah, blah. There's a Negro standing over here, and I said that word on purpose. There's a Negro cop over here, European cop over here. He pulls his gun and puts it to my temple with his finger on the trigger, and he's just trying to intimidate me, this and that. Meanwhile, I'm saying, sir, I'm a teacher. I haven't done anything wrong. What's the problem? Blah, blah, blah. My hands are obviously here. I'm looking at this Negro to try to give me some help, because I'm thinking, by looking at you look like me, maybe you'll say something. Maybe you'll do something in that powerful position you have. But you've been manipulated and mind warped as well. And you're probably more my enemy than this jerk is. So I don't want to get all off into it. I'm just saying that, yes, these feelings of anger, these feelings of fear, these feelings of survivalist tactics, instincts that have to kick in for us to survive here, it's all very real for us. And we just, it's really shouldn't be. We want other people to try to understand where we're at, because when you're looked at and they just look at you and they just come up with all these things, and then this guy was bird watching. He's in the neighborhood doing something wrong, and then the cops come down and you're in trouble. How do these things happen? Especially in a land that was ours first. And that's where I stand too. I believe that this was our land before anybody came here. And then other people went brought people from Africa here to work for them after they destroyed the indigenous people who were here. So there's a theft problem, as well as brutality and continued economic disparity.
So to not go off on too much of a tangent about, just like modern policing,
Right.
but what was I gonna say about modern policing? Goodness. Oh, right. So I was just gonna say, like, there's certainly nothing in the context of modern policing that incentivizes or beyond that, even like allows for there to be any meaningful or realistic interaction or monitoring of police for each other. Like, police have been fired from their positions just for complaining about actions pertaining to policing, not even in their department, not even in their state, on social media, and that's enough to get them fired from their positions. So, like, that's enough to do that. It certainly is enough to do that in regards to actually trying to do something in a moment. And obviously, doing something in a moment physically could be morally worth it, regardless of if you lose your job. That could be way less important, or would always be way less important, in my opinion, than potentially saving someone's life. But that's why so many, even if they're a police officer observing something wrong and they aren't directly participating in the action that's wrong, that's why they won't do anything about it.
Well, thank you. As you all know, watching your clocks, it's 2:29. And so we're not going to get a chance to bring up everything, but it has been a powerful conversation. This is recorded. We'll be able to see again, look again. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And Frank, let me call on Frank to talk about, we've got other things coming up. This is an overview of what we have in plan for the rest of the year.
Yeah. So everyone, thank you for coming. Can't do it without the people that show up and support. And we do have other events that we're going to be putting on. And everyone has been out to Eventbrite. That's where you got your tickets from. If you go back out, there will be, and you just search for the Racial Justice Collaborative, you can actually follow us, just like Facebook, Instagram, all those other things. You can hit the follow button and you'll receive an email every time that we post an event. You'll be the first ones to know about it and get the details. So we do have some coming up. There's one later in the month, and then next month. I think this series will run through October. Is that it?
Yes, yes. There's one that's not yet listed, but soon will be listed. That's about hip hop, Sundiata.
And appropriations again, because it happens all the time.
Everything is always about the money. Watch
If
the
you
money.
got something good, they'll take it because they want it, because they want to benefit from it.
Yeah. So we've got that coming up. I believe that's on the 22nd of May. So that's really soon. We're going to look for that on Eventbrite. And then in June, we've got a race retreat where we'll talk. This today is an overview of the whole thing. And then we've got workshops coming up that pull out the information. So the race retreat in June, it's more about wealth, and it's about the disparity, the wealth gap, but it's specifically going to talk about redlining, because where does middle class wealth come from? Why was it intended? It comes in housing. And redlining was, it again, like the Social Security Act of 1935, the redlining of the intention of that was to make sure Black people did not benefit. Suburbs were built to benefit white people. They put all kind of money into those suburbs. Black people, they put a red line around Black communities and said, don't give mortgages, don't let companies go in there and buy. So more of that in June, the race retreat. And then after that, we're going to talk specifically about police and mass incarceration. And then after that, in August, we've got justice and equity. Jordana's leading that up, and she's going to bring us together on the wealth that was created out of slavery. And a lot of these companies are still in existence, and we're moving up toward reparations. So we need to know about those companies. And then in September, Jai is here, Jordana, Lane, they're going to talk about white people, whiteness, and how do white people learn this superiority and to centralize whiteness and to normalize whiteness. So we're going to look at that. And then in October, we've got a new race retreat that will bring it all together. This is called the Truth Campaign. And then in October, we're going to start off on reparations. What does that mean? Okay, so thank you all very much for coming. And anybody else want to say any last word before we? Pharaoh, you have a last word, I'm sure.
My last word on this subject would be, it's just important to keep thinking about these things. You know, it was one of the first things that we said in the first conversation, which is, you know, this history is grim, but so is most of history. And what's important about it is to study it and learn from it so that we can better ourselves for the future. Because what happened has happened, and we need to understand it so that we can know what will happen and make what we want to happen, that present and that reality.
And so Lily just asked the question, if the full video is on YouTube, we're going to we'll put it up on there. And then when we send out as something after this event to thank everybody and to remind, so we can put our acknowledgements up again of the people who helped us with this, we'll send you a link to the video, and then you can watch that. And then look at our website, racialjusticecollaborative.com, and send us some contact information. You should join us. We're working on this building a movement. So join us. Thank you all. I couldn't do this without Pharaoh. Thank you, Pharaoh.